Okay, so welcome everyone to today's ANA National Webinar on food sovereignty. Today is Thursday, September 24th, 2015. It's 3 p.m. Eastern and 9 a.m. here in Hawaii. A little about ANA. ANA, the Administration for Native Americans, promotes self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects and training and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations. And ANA's vision statement is that all Native communities should be thriving. And so until that vision is fully accomplished, they will be working towards that goal. And you can learn more about ANA on their website. It's down there on screen, www.acf.hhs.gov/programs/ANA. And ANA produces webinars like this every other Thursday. So 2 webinars a month. The next webinar is going to be on October 8th, and the topic will be on human trafficking. That webinar will be presented by the ANA Western region, and you can register for that session and learn more about the topic on their website, www.anawestern.org. And today's session is being presented by the Pacific Region Training and Technical Assistance Center. So today's webinar is going to be on the topic of food sovereignty. And, a lot of different projects have interpreted this in different ways. But the basic definition is what you see there on screen. Food sovereignty is the right of peoples, communities, and countries to define their own agriculture, labor, fishing, food, and land policies, which are ecologically, socially, economically, and culturally appropriate to their unique circumstances. It includes the true right to food and to produce food, which means that all people have the right to safe, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food, and to food-producing resources and the ability to sustain themselves and their societies. And this is definition that came out of one of the many food sovereignty conferences that are happening around the world and have been for the last 10 years. So really there's a large movement worldwide about food sovereignty, and it's really based in kind of lower income communities, which are often the native or indigenous communities of places all around the world. So the term food sovereignty was coined by a group called Via Campesina in 1996, and so this is actually a relatively new movement which started in the early 90s. Via Campesina, it means the peasant's way. So what it really is a global social movement organized around peasant farmers in countries all around the world. So this is one of the largest social movements in the world, representing more than 200 million peasant farmers. And peasant farmers, this is a term that they use themselves. Peasant farmers refers to lower income farmers, in most cases lower income, who either own or rent a small parcel of land that they farm, both for their own subsistence and sometimes to make an income. But the primary purpose would be for the subsistence of themselves, possibly their family, and maybe for their communities. But there's a lot of these small farmers have been they have been taken over by large companies, multinational corporations, especially as a result of increasingly liberalized free trade going across national borders. So what's been happening is a lot of these peasant farmers, they they have a certain parcel of land, and then the government, backed by policies that they create around one of these very large, organization companies, will go in and take their land and take over their right to farm that land, or force them to farm a certain type of thing, or basically taking away the rights the sovereignty that these individual farmers have over their parcel. And so this is all created out of a reaction to that free trade, also to land grabbing, also to what they see as should be a right to water, reaction to climate change, which affects global temperatures, which in hand affects the natural flooding and rain patterns that they rely on. And it's also a reaction to seeds, the increasing control um, and privatization of seeds. So, for example, a lot of companies will actually patent their seeds, and you need to have an agreement with the company in order to grow them, or else you get sued and shut down. And so, the sovereignty that they're talking about is really, it has to do with the ability to create to be able to feed yourself. And what they really advocate for is food sovereignty as an inherent human right, that each person should have the ability to feed themselves through the land, and each community should have the right to choose how and you know how they should get that food, and also have a say in the policies that guide that food production. And now this right to food sovereignty is actually um, enshrined in the national constitutions of 8 different countries across the world. So it is being adopted, though not by the U.S. And so, especially here in Hawaii, and we're presenting here in Hawaii, and we will be featuring two food sovereignty projects that are based in Hawaii. There is a difference between food sovereignty and what we often talk about in Hawaii as food security. In Hawaii, we live on islands, and so 90% of our food is actually imported from either the continental U.S. or from other countries. Um, and the food security says that should those ships stop coming someday, that we're not going to be able to make up that 90% shortfall because we don't have enough production here. But food security is really focused more on just making sure that each citizen of a community has the total amount of food that they need to stay nourished. And that food can come from outside or inside. All it is basically making sure that you have enough in your reserves to be secure, no matter where the source is from. On the other hand, food sovereignty really refers to the inherent right that one has to produce one's own food and to determine how that food is produced. So, yeah, food sovereignty has implications beyond just making sure each person is fed. It's really deciding how you're going to do that as a community. And so the food sovereignty movement has 6 core principles. This is kind of just combined based on a bunch of different organizations' philosophies, but they do pretty much share the same tenets through Via Campesina, and through individual community value systems. Of course, it's going to be based on your specific community, but these are the general principles, and these could also serve as principles or goals in a project that you might design for your community. So the first is food for people. And so what this is that each person has the right to grow one's own food. People should be able to do that. People should not be forced to go hungry because they don't have access to land to grow basic food. So this is a core belief of food sovereignty. Another belief is valuing food providers, and so this is in several ways. First is just civilly as a person, that each food provider is someone who is deserving of all the same rights as the person who owns the grocery store chain. Um, the next would be professionally, that this person should be compensated for all of the labor that they're putting into producing food. And the last is culturally, that we should honor the traditional methods and the types of food that food providers want to and are willing to produce. Um, Another principle is localizing food systems. And so food sovereignty came out of a reaction to this increasingly centralized big ag system, which, you know, which because of the big centralization of agriculture and the money behind that agriculture, all these centralized groups are able to affect policy of the governments of the countries where their food is being grown. And so that kind of locks these big ag companies into the actual structure of the government and society, and in turn forces everyone to rely on their system in order for food to happen, and kind of, you know, homogenizes all of the type of food that you can have access to. And so localizing food systems is about decentralizing that those corporations, and it's definitely related to the next tenet of making decisions locally. And this is really about recognizing that each regional community has their distinct needs, has their distinct culture, their distinct resources. Some in Hawaii, some communities might be near the ocean, and they need to manage the fish and the water, and some other communities might be up in the mountains and they need to manage the stream supplies, they need to manage the forestry and invasive animals. And so this is really about bringing decision making back to your area, and really building on knowledge and skills that a lot of our communities have had for generations. So, our people have lived in their communities oftentimes for hundreds of years, and the knowledge that they gain through their relationship with the land really is still applicable today when it comes to resource management, farming. In Hawaii, for example, a lot of our practices are based on the moon phases, and there's a lot of regional knowledge, region-specific knowledge that applies maybe just to one beach that corresponds to the moon phase, and it would be people from that community who would understand those types of subtleties. And so it's that relationship with nature that is especially resonates with people who are closest to nature, like our native communities. And so these are all principles of food sovereignty. When it comes to ANA projects, food sovereignty as a concept can form the basis for projects under several ANA funding opportunities. Of course, your project will have to be based on the needs of your specific community. So it'll be based on the problem statement that you identify. But for example, you might apply for a SEDS grant, our social economic development strategies grant, and teach traditional farming techniques. Through our seeds employment focused program, you might help raise new farmers, or maybe train entrepreneur farmers, create jobs. Through a NABI grant, our asset building grant, and this is something that another Hawaii nonprofit has done, which is creating individual development accounts for farm hands, people working on the farm. Every day that they work, the money that they earn is matched in an individual development account that will help them go to college and get a degree. And or you could apply for an ERE grant if you're part of an eligible tribe, and this could be about protecting tribal land and water jurisdiction and quality, and really literally protecting the sovereignty of your tribal resources. And some tips when it comes to implementing a project like this, and this is based on a list of best practices that ANA gathered in 2013. You want to really be realistic with volunteer labor. So a lot of times, when we're designing our projects, we just imagine that the community will come out in droves and will just volunteer all the farming labor for us, and we'll just be able to rely on that. But a lot of times, people might be really fired up to volunteer for the first week or two or three, but when it comes to month 6 or 7, they're not so willing to spend a lot of time out in the hot sun doing backbreaking work. So just be realistic. If you have more people, you can spread the work, and it also takes some expertise sometimes. You also want to leverage partnerships, especially when it comes to equipment like tractors, or expensive things, or especially things that are not covered by ANA grants, like fixed structures. And also, leverage partnerships to increase your capacity of what you are able to do. And then you also want to value elder knowledge and leadership, just for that traditional basis, and because elders often know things about the land that are we would never think of. Um, so that's enough for me. That's just kind of sets the stage for some basic concepts. But this time I want to pass it off to the first of our two guest presenters today. They're from Kua Foundation here in Oahu, Hawaii. Kua Aina Ulu Awamo. The We'll be starting with our first presenter, Kevin Chang. Kevin is the executive director of Kua, a nonprofit movement building organization with a mission to increase the capacity of community-based resource management initiatives with a vision of Aina Momona, an abundant and productive ecological system that supports community well-being. Kua advances its mission through the facilitation of grassroots uh, community-driven learning networks, and the development of more equitable collaborations between communities, agencies, and larger conservation initiatives. He oversees all organizational, fiscal, administrative, and programmatic aims. He has a BA in psychology and a JD from the University of Oregon. Prior to Kua, he was a land manager for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and a field representative for the Trust for Public Lands Hawaiian Island program. Kevin is also married to Alma Siria, and on occasion a band called Kupa Aina. And he'll be joined by Miwa Tamanaha, the deputy director of Kua, who has spent the last 15 years working for marine and watershed protection, from education to policy in Hawaii, rural Mexico, Central and Southern California, and Tanzania. Prior to Kua, she was executive director at Kahea, a local environmental and cultural advocacy nonprofit. Miwa has a BA and MA in economics from the University of Southern California, and she lives with her husband and two small kids on Leeward, Oahu. So at this time, I'd like to pass it off to Kevin and Miwa.
Thank you, Matt. You can hear me okay, right?
Yep, sounds
Okay, solid. Aloha, my name is Kevin, and Miwa's here sitting with me. Uh, we work for an organization called Kua Aina Ulu Awa Mo. Kua Aina means basically grassroots, or over time, the term Kua Aina has evolved. What it once meant the people who were the backbone of the land, and then over time, sort of like that word campesina, it kind of evolved into a kind of derogatory term, and now kuaina is coming back as a word that people assert to describe themselves and their way of life. These are the people who work and sweat on the land, cultivate the land, and live with the land, and feel that they have a sacred responsibility to that place. Our name for our organization, Kua'aina Ulu Awamo. Ulu means to grow, and Awamo is the carrying stick, or the, I guess the Spanish word is palanquin. It's the long stick that's carried over many shoulders to carry a heavy burden or obligation. And Kua itself, the acronym, means backbone. So a big part of our work is we bring Kua'aina communities, primarily rural Native Hawaiian community groups, families, and individual practitioners together to discuss issues and learn from each other and grow and empower each other. And through these meetings over the past probably, I guess, 13 or 14 years now, they have come to grow and trust each other, and also to identify common systemic barriers that keep them from cultivating and relating to the aina, the land and the resources of the land in a more healthy way that would feed and sustain themselves, their communities, and their well-being. This is just a picture of one of our gatherings. We bring folks together in large gatherings at least once a year, and then we have smaller, more strategic gatherings throughout the year. This is from the island of Molokai in 2013. This is our theory of change. We work from the bottom up. If you look at this picture, you can start from the bottom because we believe communities have a sacred role, and that their relationship with the aina, the land that feeds them, requires that they have a healthy relationship, and they also have the knowledge to take care of those places. We believe that because of that role, they should play a larger role in managing our resources, and through that, we provide them through gatherings, training tools, facilitation, network building, and other skills. We help them to become decision makers, resource managers, sustainable organizations, and we help them to adapt to changing conditions. Through this, they will achieve Aina Momona. Aina Momona, Aina being that which feeds us, the land and its resources. Momona literally meaning fat. So the fat lands, the abundant lands, a place of abundance is their vision. We believe that by bringing communities together, they will meet qualifications, meet certain steps required. I think that to build connections with people, to move forward together and build a movement together, often called the logic of movements, laid out by a guy named Parker Palmer. Um, when we bring individuals together from their places, they find that they're not alone. They stop leading divided lives. They decide that they're in this together. They discover that they can do it and support each other, and empowered, they take their individual issues and make them public issues. They move them forward together. This map here is just an example of the communities that our networks touch on. So we facilitate three networks, which I'll kind of describe later, but those networks collectively touch on these areas throughout our state. So the map basically sets forth the names of the areas, not the groups, but the places where they do their work. These are Lavaia fishermen, Mahi'ai farmers, um, and Mahi'i'a people who farm fish through traditional aquaculture, fish ponds throughout the state, fisheries, traditional management areas, often called ahupua'a, um, based on community needs, community resources, and trying to live within your means. Um, One of the things I wanted to highlight, and this picture sort of is an exemplar of that, is a sort of a campaign we've been calling Lavai Apono, which is to fish Hawaiian. We've been working with three communities over quite a while now to develop management rules for their fisheries. Um, this is based on a state law, and then I'll go into that again a little bit more later. But they're working together to develop place-based rules. This picture is from October 2014, where members of about maybe 10 different communities statewide came to Hanalei on the island of Kauai to support the efforts of the Haena community in moving forward the first rules for community-based fisheries in our state. And those rules were signed into law um, less than a month ago by our governor. So these rules are called community-based subsistence fishing area rules, and they're based on a law that was passed 20 years ago for the purpose of reaffirming and protecting fishing practices customarily and traditionally exercised for the purpose of Native Hawaiian subsistence, culture, and religion. This is the only law that I know of that actually affirms the practices of our native population, traditionally exercised for the purpose of their subsistence needs. It's almost like a secret law. It's becoming something people are becoming more aware of because it actually says that the rules of the place can be defined by the people most dependent on that place and the people with the longest historical relationship with that place. And those are our Hawaiian people. Um, these rules allow them to create the kind of the baseline standards for fishing in their area, and it also allows them to play a role if they want in helping our state to manage the area through programs like what's called Makai Watch. It should be noted that these rules in these areas, when they're established, are not established to exclude people, but are basically setting baseline rules for anybody who comes to fish in the area. So, in other words, it doesn't violate the United States Constitution, which has been an issue for some folks. This is this is kind of part of the area. I think this is called the Makuapuu Honua area. This area is the community has set aside a small portion of this area as a nursery because their elders have said this area serves as a nursery, and they have actually scientifically shown that this area has the largest amount of pua or baby fish. This is a map of the boundary of their community-based subsistence fishing area. If you can see from the going from the left to the right, that area encompasses the barriers of what was the traditional ahupua'a of Haena. Ahupua'a is a word that refers to basically it's sort of like a sliver of land that's set aside for a community. Um, often it encompasses a watershed. Um, it's a small piece of land which is part of a larger land management scheme that the chiefs of old set forth quite a long time ago. And in fact, these areas are still somewhat um, recognized even in our politics through political districts. But anyway, so these boundaries actually encompass the traditional area of this community. This map it just gives you an example of some of the communities who over the past 20 years really have been begun lining up to make rules despite our state's failure up until really last month to help implement this. You'll see one of these communities, Mo'omomi. Mo'omomi is the actual community, the first community really that inspired the laws that are allowing these communities to move forward. And the elder of that community is still going strong, and we're hoping that his rules will be the next to move forward. This is a picture from October of last year at the Board of Land and Natural Resources when our BLNR unanimously approved the rules for the Haina community-based subsistence fishing area. And this is just a quote from Presley Wan. He is the leader of the Hui Maka Ainana o Makana, a group of the traditional families of Haena, soon after the rules were passed by our BLNR. For the first time in over 100 years since Konohiki rights were neglected, we have begun to take steps together towards caring for our resources, our place in the future. He's noting the word Konohiki. Konohiki was a traditional land manager of the fishery as well as the land, the ahupua'a. Through this law, communities are becoming the Konohiki in a new and contemporary way, using the past traditions and values and combining them with contemporary practices. The community is the Konohiki. Um, this is just wanted to touch on the networks we facilitate. On the left here is Ealupu, which is our largest network, and it is the network that called Kua into existence. Our organization wouldn't exist if they didn't want us to exist, to serve them and their desire to convene and move forward together. Ealupu itself means to move forward together. It's made up of 32 Malama Aina groups throughout our state. Uh, Next to that logo, you'll see the Hui Malama Loko'i'a. That group is comprised of about 38 uh, traditional Hawaiian fish pond restoration projects throughout the state. They have been meeting for maybe 10 years now. We have recently been called upon to help bring them together and facilitate their meetings. And our newest network is called the Limu Hui, primarily made up of kupuna or elders who are interested in preserving their practices and teaching future generations, as well as hopefully one day bringing Limu back to the places it's now gone. And then to the further right is just the campaign I spoke about regarding community-based subsistence fishing areas called Lawai'a Pono. This scheme essentially just lays out kind of how we see things happening. Because we're community driven, our job really is to try to build a healthy context for communities to decide where they want to go. And we are currently in the middle of helping them develop governing mechanisms, building councils, finding common agreements on conduct and values, and that has become most ripe in Ealupu, I think partly because of its long history. I'm not going to go too deep into this. This is a picture of Ealupu at their last convening in Ho'okena, in Kona, the Moko of Kona on the island of Hawaii, hosted by Kama'aina United to Protect the Aina. We had about 120 people there camping for 3 days, which they do work together. They share experiences together, and they visit each other's places and learn from each other. And that's our logo and my contact information. If you have any questions, I think that's it, Matt.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for presenting that about your organization. We'll have Kevin's contact information up on screen later, and you'll be able to ask him and our next presenter some questions during the Q&A section, which will be right this next presentation. And so um, coming up next, we have uh, Kuaokala Public Charter School from the Big Island of Hawaii. And joining us by phone, we have Leila Kealoha. Leila is a teacher at Kuaokala. She's a native of Puna on Hawaii Island. Her background is in forestry and environmental studies, and she's currently pursuing her master's degree in educational administration. She's been in education with charter schools for the last 13 years and currently teaches grades 6 to 12 across many subjects and projects. In her experience working with charter schools, she says that she's only been able to be successful with assistance from grants, such as the one that they had in ANA, which they recently successfully completed, that has helped to support sustainability in their communities. And so at this time, I'd like to pass it off to Leila Kealoha to present some. So, Leila?
Aloha.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
yep, can you hear you loud and clear?
Okay, perfect. Aloha mai kako. My name is Leila Kealoha, and today I'll be sharing just a little bit about the Ike Aina from Seed to Table grant that our school was a part of. First, I'd just like to give a little bit of a background information about our nonprofit partnering agency and our school. So Ho'olulahui is the nonprofit that was founded by Keiki Aloha Kekipi and Susan Osborne in 1994. That's the picture you see here of Uncle Keiki on the screen. And so they, Keiki and Susie, worked for many years to start this organization to help nurture and perpetuate the Hawaiian culture, beliefs, and lifestyles in Mokahi with the community. And they founded Puna Culture Education Center that's here in Lower Puna. And over the years, they started Kuaokala. So in 2002, Kuaokala Public Charter School was started with Keiki and Susie, and our school has been in existence since. So that's where we are today, 13 years later, 14 years later of our school being in existence. And like I mentioned before, it wouldn't be possible without grants that have come through the nonprofit organization Ho'olulahui to really support the initiatives of our school and our community here in Lower Puna. So we received the grant, Ike Aina grant, back in 2010, I believe, and the focus was on seed to table, so really establishing organic vegetable gardens, gardening projects, integrating agriculture and culinary into the education of middle school students. It was really aimed at improving the overall dietary and nutritional awareness of cultural lifestyles of our Native Hawaiian students and families in the Puna district. Through this project, students developed a site of organic gardening, site preparation, ground and soil development, water catchments, and so forth, and we'll kind of go through that in a minute or so. So the goal, like I said, was to integrate agriculture and culinary programs, utilizing a culturally responsive approach that supports a healthy, sustainable lifestyle for our Native Hawaiian students and families in the Puna community by the end of the 3-year period. Some of the impact indicators were that partnerships be formed 2 annually. We have now, by the end of the grant, formed over 10 partnerships, or memorandum of understanding with the partners in the community. Students that were parts of these classes passed with 85% of them passing the courses. And the overall product at the end of the grant, one of the overall products was to create a cookbook by the students. And they were able to distribute and disseminate over 200 cookbooks. So this is the site that's currently right down the road from our school. Our school is located next to Ahalanui or Mauna Kea Warm Pond, and we're basically on or within Native Hawaiian village, an ancient Hawaiian fishing village, and surrounded by forest here, native forest. So we kind of had to go a little bit further down the property and find an area that would be, available for being able to do this. And as you can see here, it's totally just rock. So the site was prepped, and the students walked each day from the main campus down to the ag site, about a quarter mile each way to get there, and basically just starting from the ground up. So here is a picture of the traditional planting style of this area. And if you can see the picture on the left, it is sort of this rock circle that's starting to form. And the planting style is called pu'us, or pu'u or pu'e. And it's really just taking rocks and building a circular formation going up to be able to plant within. The students started with this, building pu'u, and started to gather mulch to put within the pu'u to start with growing some bananas was the first thing that we started down there. Some of the first canoe plants that we began with. One of the next steps was to create a space where they would hold their water catchment, because there is no water line going into the site, and also to fence it off because there's lots of wild pigs in the area that tend to come and eat the crops. So they first started with building up the area with where they're going to place the water catchment, and then slowly got the area fenced off, and came up with, innovative ways of trying to catch the water also. But it's been a very long process to get to this point as well, too. So some of the first crops that were planted out there in the on the site, the ag site, were tomatoes and chard and kale. And it was amazing what these kids were able to pull off out of rocks and just a little bit of soil that was brought in and some mulch. And all these vegetables that were being grown were coming back to their culinary class that they would then produce a meal out of. So this is another picture of where the water catchments were placed, and then bringing in the cinder to level up the area. And you can see the soil in the background. Those were used to create beds for planting. Here's one of our students on the right-hand side with the first harvest of the cucumbers that came out of here that were also used in the culinary class as well. So these pictures are back at our main campus. You can see the picture on the bottom is within a large greenhouse. The system that's being used there is Vertigrow, and this was part of an ANA grant that came through to help begin this greenhouse. So the Vertigrow system is basically pots set on top of each other and growing vertically. And then in the top sections there, students used old wash bins and old coolers, painted them up, kind of made them a little bit nicer, and we're growing eggplant and kale down here as well too. So there were many different facets of trying to grow the vegetables for the school. Here is a picture of some of the vegetables that came out of the gardens. The left-hand side, of course, we can see there's chard, there's peppers and kale. On the top right-hand corner is one of our students harvesting kale out of there as well. Part of the elementary students were also incorporated into the gardening programs, and if you can see where the bottom right-hand corner, this is corn being grown out of contemporary pu'u, we call them, which are just basically wire bins with weed mat and soil and mulch inside. This is the first crops of corn that we grew down here at our school. Next is a picture of traditional culinary practices, which is imu. In the center on the left-hand side and the top right-hand is Uncle Keiki Aloha Kikipi working with our students to prepare imu down here at our school to support the culinary class in feeding guests that would come through or just activities or events that we had for our school. This next picture shows some of the pictures from our culinary arts program, which was in conjunction to our Seed to Table grant. So basically growing the food in the gardens and then bringing it to the table to actually feed ourselves in our community. There's a picture here of students basically grating coconuts and creating our own coconut milk. Some of the pictures on the right show some of the sweet potatoes that were grown. And then the bottom right is some of the vegetables that were also harvested out of the gardens. And these are the students just preparing lunch. So as part of a program through the beginning of the grant that we received, every Wednesday the project class, the culinary class, would cook lunches, and the teachers had the option to purchase a lunch if they wanted to, or donate a little bit of money towards the students program for the lunches that they were creating. Here's another picture of some more of our students. I'd like to just acknowledge on the bottom right-hand corner, this is Prana Mando. She was a teacher here at Kuo'okala that started with the school, who has now moved on to another school, but she was a part of this entire grant with the students and really was the foundation of beginning our agriculture program. And working with Mariposa Banco, who's up in the upper left-hand corner, kind of in the left section right there, that's the culinary arts teacher. They're two of the kumu that worked really hard in getting this program put together. And to continue it today, Mariposa is still with us doing the culinary program with our students. You can see the picture in the upper right-hand corner. The students were just very proud of the different types of vegetables that they were growing from the seed, really, and starting them from starts and planting them out and then actually harvesting. So a full circle of really of their own work and just the pride that they took in actually in growing their own food. So part of the culinary arts class as well too, the students in that class would serve snacks each week to the elementary students. Some of the items came in through community members that had different vegetables or fruits that were in season that they would donate to the school, and then the culinary arts classes would take whatever they harvested from their gardens and create snacks for all of the elementary students. Here's a picture of one of the lunches that were served through our culinary arts class. Here, it's just been amazing what these students were able to do over the years. These are some of the partners in our community that really supported different programs that have come through our school. If you can see in the center there is Keiki Aloha Kikipi, and you can't necessarily see Susie Osborne, but she is on the right-hand side with her head turned right there. She's the other co-founder of Ho'olahui and the head of our school, with lunches that were created and provided by our culinary arts class. Part of the initiatives that were carried out through this program, that there were lunches served to over 650 guests, to other Hawaiian charter schools, the University of Hawaii Women's Club, Washington State University, guests from Australia and Thailand, the Rotary Club from Thailand and Singapore, or Taiwan, excuse me, Singapore and Burma and Canada, India, New Zealand. These are all just different guests that come throughout the Puala Cultural Education Center over the years that the Culinary Arts Program was able to provide lunches for. Part of the Seed to Table grant was also growing ulu trees. These are ma'afala ulu trees that were grown from tissue cultured, that were purchased by the nonprofit, grown up, and then eventually distributed out into our community. Part of the process of teaching our kids about From Seed to Table is also doing collaboration with our church that was part of our foundation of our school. And here we have some of the students and parents and our kupuna making laulaus for their annual ho'ike that the church hosts each year. So through the Culinary Arts Program also there were chefs that came through that worked with our students in our local community. Auntie Sandra that did traditional Japanese, Auntie Shirley, which did traditional Hawaiian, Auntie Ray, which did traditional Chinese, and there were some Oreo vegan farms, Cafe Pesto, and Ohia Jams that came through and worked with our students to teach them different styles of cooking, and just sharing their mana'o with our kids about different types of foods to prepare. So students were also part of an educational outreach. They cooked for and provided 500 samples at the Sustainability Fair at the Palace Theater in Hilo. They distributed seeds and recipes at the HBO screening of Weight of a Nation, a documentary addressing obesity. These are just a few of our students here that were part of the culinary program at the Sustainability Fair. Here is an informational booth that was set up by our school, and on the left-hand side is Susie Osborne. She's our head of school, the one who works really hard at finding funding for our school. And on the right hand is Mariposa Michael, who is the culinary arts teacher here. And you can see this picture on the right of Mariposa, a big picture. That's the cover of the students' cookbook they created. And this is them at the Sam Choi Poke contest in Oahu. Some of the field trips that occurred through the program as well too were up to Ahulani Ranch in Honaka'a Ma'o Farms, the Kona Ulu Festival, Taste of the Range, Cafe Pesto, Farmers Market, the Macknut Farms, Aquaponic Farm, Food Sovereignty Conference, and catered the opening of Cultural Surveys Hawaii. You can see the students there. They just finished killing and cleaning the pig. Here are students, I believe this is at Ma'o Farms, hands down to the ground. So visiting our sister Ohana over there on Oahu and just learning about their practices of how they farm there. Here's one of our students in the lo'i. Here's a picture with the chef from Cafe Pesto, the students that were part of the culinary program. We took them out. So being that we're in a rural area, Susie and Mark thought it was important to take the students out to sit in a nice restaurant to and to honor the chef that came down to work with them. Just giving them skills as well too to be out in restaurants, which some of them are not used to. So one thing that occurred each year at the end of the year for the students in the culinary and ag program was that we have what's called Iron Shet Puala'a. The students in the 4th end of third quarter would start their seeds, pick out ingredients that they want to use to create their dishes at the end of the year. So they started their plants from seeds, they grew them out through the fourth quarter, and they harvested at the end of the year. And they participated in what's called Iron Chefs. And some of the teachers that were here were part of the judges that got to try the dishes and then honor the top Iron Chef. Also, some of the food that was harvested from the gardens, you can see on the right-hand side is banana, some of the first bananas that came through our gardens, and they were used in our yearly makahiki ceremony, honoring the god Lono, and part of the honoring of God, the god Lono, which is a time of harvest. And so it was really awesome to have some of our first fruits of the land that came from our gardens to offer for makahiki. And this is part of where the harvest had gone to, the ahu in the area called Kalea, which is just a part of our makahiki ceremony. This is just another picture of us during the ceremony process. Some of the awards that were given to the program was the Mayor's Malama Award for Iki Aina from Seat to the Table. There was a recognition from the senators for honoring and perpetuating Hawaiian culture through the Ulu Festival. We were a part of the first Ulu Festival in Kona, and the students got first place for their Ulu tamales and second place for their Ulu popsicles. They got the overall healthiest dish at the Kona Ulu Festival. Then we hosted our first Ulu Festival the following year, and the students placed second for their Ulu quiche, and they also placed first at the Sam Choi Poke contest for spicy Ulu poke. This was just in honor of the award with the Malama Award from Mayor Billy Kinoi with our students in our culinary and ag program. This is the luncheon that was provided that day for the mayor and some of the guests that joined him that day from our culinary arts students and program. Here's a picture of one of our students holding their dishes. This is a lot of the different things they learned how to make with the ulu that grows on our campus. On the right-hand side is ulu popsicles, which they did win a prize for on the Ulu Festival. On the left-hand side is their ulu poke, ulu tamales that were done from ulu. Here are a few pictures of the prizes from the culinary arts program at the Sam Choi Poke contest. So we celebrated our first annual Puna Ulu Festival in 2012. This is just a few pictures of some of the harvest of the trees around our ahupua'a here and on our aina here at Puala'a. We had over 1,200 people who attended the first Ulu Festival, which was a huge success for us. There was a cooking contest, demonstrations of cooking, traditional ulu poi pounding, the Pacific Island ulu cooking methods, tree propagation and maintenance. We had a ceremonial tree planting of an ulu tree. There was making of tapa from the ulu bark, and then also different workshops that were hosted about the cultural uses and history of ulu. And this is the cookbook that was created from the students about the different foods that they harvested over the grant period, Iki Aina from seed to table, cooking with locally grown foods. Mahalo.
All right, thank you very much, Leila, for that presentation on the ANA-funded food sovereignty project that they just wrapped up successfully. And mahalo again to both of our presenters. I think they both presented, different perspectives on very much the same theme. So, they're both based in Hawaii, but you can see how Kua Foundation was really working at a more institutional, macro level, and Kuokala Charter School is working at a much more focused, small micro level, starting with the children. So two great perspectives on a theme. So at this time, we're going to have our open Q&A, maybe for about the next 5 minutes. If you have any questions, just type it into the chat box. It should be on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll direct those to one of the speakers that we had today. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box now. And we'll keep this Q&A session open for the next 5 minutes or so. Okay, so we have a question from Lynn McNutt. And she asks, has anyone investigated the idea of having an ag academy in our schools similar to the construction academy model? Maybe we can direct this to Leila. Do you want to maybe address that question, Leila?
Sure. So yes, it has definitely been one of the ideas and one of the thoughts to create academies for students within areas such as agriculture, sustainability, and so forth. I'm not too sure how much of the process has actually been put into it, but that's definitely a goal, is to create a satellite site here in Puna, because we're so far away from the main town, to give students the opportunity to practice in agriculture. So I think it would be something great to be a part of, for sure. Any thoughts or any guidance you can give would be greatly appreciated.
Yes, and we will be posting the contact information for both presenters at the end of this session. So, feel free to reach out to them if you have ideas or partnerships, or even if you have questions. We have another question from Ed, and this is also directed to Leila. Can you discuss your program's connection, if any, to farm to school?
Okay, I'm looking for the. Can I discuss your program's connection with any farm? So we are part of Farm to School. We do have a food corps person currently working with us. One of the biggest challenges for us with this agriculture program has been, over the past year, is the agriculture teacher that was working with us was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last year. So we lost our agriculture teacher who had been with us from the very beginning. And we're now, just at the beginning of the school year, looking for someone to kind of take that place. And we do have a food corps person, like I said, that just started with us a few weeks ago. So we're really just trying to start to build our agriculture program back up after the last 8 months of not having an agriculture teacher. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
All right, thanks, Leila. And okay, so we have another question from Gila. Were there any classes with credits offered through your ANA grant project? And is there a website or someplace where we can learn more about your project? This is for Leila as well.
Were there credits? Was that the question?
Was there any classes with credits offered through the project? I believe it was part of the actual school day, right?
Yes. So students received an elective credit for this project. It was a 3-hour-long class each once a week, and that's where they received their elective credit for their classes. It fell on a project day for us where we have other projects occurring on campus as well, such as forestry, mechanics, lauhala weaving, and other types of different projects that are happening. So the students did receive an elective credit for that through this program.
All right, thank you. Okay, and we have a very specific question for you again, Leila, and maybe you guys at KUA can weigh in on this if you have any feedback. But this person asks, how have you changed your farming practices to address the rat lung worm? And maybe you can talk about, in addition to that, any other type of invasive disease or species that you might need to deal with in the process of this type of project. So we can start with Leila, and then maybe Kevin or Miwa can weigh in on this topic after that.
That's a great question. So everything that we use that comes out of the garden has to be thoroughly rinsed and sanitized for sure. We have had rat lungworm disease here in Puna area, specifically the worst anywhere else in the state. And this year, actually, we have a rat lungworm specialist working with our students on a rat lungworm project down here at our school to identify the problems that we're having with the different types of carriers of this disease. And it's been great, and it's actually embedded into the agriculture class that's been a part of this whole process. So it's really just being very mindful of anything that's being grown, identifying the areas or things that the rat lungworms are getting into. But really, over the past few years, we haven't had as much problems with the slugs and the snails coming through, so it's kind of been a little bit less scary for us, really. But everything needs to be thoroughly rinsed, and that's part of the sanitation that the students are taught as well. And Kaʻānaniʻau is the person who is actually working with us through the UH right now doing this rat lungworm project with us. So mahalo for the question.
This is Kevin. Can't really say much about the rat lungworm issue. Most of our guys, the folks in the Puna area that we have worked with, have been mostly focused on fishery issues.
Thank you, Kevin. So even, so rat lungworm might be an issue that is affecting ag, but are there similar types of invasive problems, disease, or species that might affect some of the marine resources that you guys work with, and how do you?
Ciguatera is always an issue, but I think sometimes it varies from place to place and species. There are issues with some species of fish that have been introduced to Hawaii, things like the ta'ape and the roi. Communities haven't been speaking too much to having large issues with them yet. There's no scientific evidence yet to show that they're invasive in the sense that they're actually taking over and eliminating populations. That's still an answer to be a question to be answered. Um, but the issue often is part of the debate over how and whether a community can have a community-based subsistence fishing area, because some people want to catch these species for commercial use, and not all areas may be open to commercial use.
All right, thank you for that. So this will be our last question, and I guess we can start with Kua on this one. Do either of the groups have connections with community colleges or continuing education programs? We need to build a pipeline for younger students, but also for adult education. So I guess we can start with Kevin on that.
Hi, Lynn. I think that's a good question. Um, we don't have any strong connect with the community college or continuing education programs. Throughout my career, though, I have been often working with groups like I think there's a group called Pipes that tries to create a pipeline for Hawaiian and Pacific Islander youth, but that's out of UH Hilo. Um, but as an organization, we're always trying to bring our elders and our youth together for education and growth. But our networks just generally have an intergenerational aspect to them. But yeah, let's go. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that, Leila, about your project and the connection pipelines through colleges and adulthood?
Yeah, that so it's more so in our high school projects that we actually do have the Running Start program for students to be able to get college credit alongside receiving elective credits for our project days. So right now, the goal is to get students from 9th through 12th grade getting dual credit in high school. So right now they're getting an English credit and a digital media arts credit for their Wednesday projects. And like the question was asked before about the ag programs as well too. So that's one of our goals is to get some agriculture and forestry embedded into the high school to get some dual credits. So we're working on it for sure. Mahalo nui.
Okay, mahalo, Leila. So that's all the time we have for questions. Um, Thank you for all your questions. Those were very on topic. So once again, we have national webinars twice a month, always on a Thursday. So the next one is going to be happening on October 8th. Once again, this is going to be addressing human trafficking. It'll be presented by the ANA Western region, and you can sign up at their website. You can also find out about events that ANA is holding on the ANA website, particularly on their events page. And so this is the end of the session. I just want to thank everyone for attending today's ANA national webinar presented by Kaʻānaniʻau, the operators of the Pacific Region Training and Technical Assistance Center. My name is Matt. I am the Outreach and Training Specialist at the ANA TTA Center. You can see my information there on the left. Feel free to contact me with any questions. And I'll also leave the contact info for today's presenters here on the screen. Feel free to contact them if you have any ideas for partnerships or if you just have questions about their project or the type of concepts that they presented. Once again, this is a national webinar presented by the Administration for Native Americans. This session is being recorded, and I'll be sending out an email following this webinar to everyone who attended live, and that will include the the PowerPoint we used today, as well as some links to other resources you might want to use. So thanks again for participating, and have a great day. Aloha.
Aloha. Macaroni.
Oi, kaulu hua me ka pi hoi hoi au e ui ka ana kala Pito makailo Oke ho'olo he ole Ano he ka o kole Ka mai kaile On nakuru Au I am a super master kung fu superstar. Every day I wake up early and drive my SUV into a populous city where I drink a $5 coffee and my friends on me while you roll with me. And I'm also lazy, very stretchy because I go yoga every day. My Pilates, my yoga, and veggies and Oi, kaulu hua me ka pi hoi hoi au mama ke hele hia moi, no ka hanala, ke lana mai na bane, ura maga hoa mane, huli makabu, hone kasturi, Oi, kaulu hua me ka pi hoi hoi au mama ke hele hia moi.